start.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Lindsay, the Frugal Crafter, and we are live here for a painting live stream today. Hopefully everyone can hear us. I have Sarah in studio with me.
Hi.
And she can let me know if you guys have any questions as we're going along today. When you're chatting, if you're watching this on my blog and you don't know what we're talking about when I say when we're chatting, if you click on, there's two links there that say YouTube watch page. It's right above the video player. If you click on that, it'll take you to YouTube where you can see the live chat and you can talk with other crafty friends or ask me questions. If you do have a question for me, please keep it related to the project that we're doing and the media that we're using. And just type the word question in all caps and then type your question as normal. Otherwise, YouTube will see something with all caps and boot it out of there. If it's something that's been asked before, the moderators will help you with it. And if it's a fresh new question, then Sarah will ask it to me. So that way everything will get answered and everyone will be helped. And of course, if you have helpful hints to add, you can do that in chat as well. Did I forget anything, Sarah?
I think you got it all.
All right, wonderful. I have links to all the supplies I'm using, reference photo, and this is a reference photo, by the way, and supplies, pattern, all that jazz in the video description. You can find the supplies I'm using from our sponsor, jerrysartorama.com. I'll be using their house brand Turner watercolors as well as some core watercolors. And I'm using the cores mainly because I had squeezed some out in these little caps at one point. Now I don't really like this as for a palette pan anymore, but I want to use it up, so I'm trying to get through those. The paint lasts forever, so it's a chore, but it's a fun chore at least. And we're going to change the painting a little bit differently than what I did for my practice piece here, because with my practice piece I was liking it, and then I thought, I know, I'll put a background in, and then it all went downhill from there. And then I thought I would throw some pretzel salt because we had some like jumbo pretzels and we had all the salt left over, so I threw some of that on there. And I mean, it was just a rescue mission after that. So it won't be exactly like this. It'll be much nicer, hopefully. And we're going to begin by getting a large juicy brush, and we are going to wet the entire pineapple and leaves. Don't wet the background though. And don't worry if you splash some of the outside, that might give you a cool mixed media effect. In fact, I might do that on purpose. The paper I'm using is different than anything I've used before. I don't think I've used this before on the channel. Maybe I have. This is Strathmore Aquarius, and it's a mix of cotton and synthetic. So it's got that, but it doesn't feel like plastic like Yupo does. It's a very smooth surface. And it's only 80 pounds, but it doesn't buckle that much, so I don't have it taped down, and that's because of the plastic that's in the paper. So I thought this might give us a kind of a neat effect. This paper's been around for a while. I've had this, I'm still working on a batch that I bought probably 10 years ago. And it's not very expensive. I like that too. It's reliable and inexpensive, but it is going to act a little differently than your typical watercolor paper.
Baru Siva, do you think for painting flowers, hot press watercolor paper is better than cold press?
Well, you know, I personally prefer cold press. A lot of botanical artists, though, like for doing really detailed flowers, they prefer hot press just because you don't have that surface texture of the paper getting in your way. So I really think it comes down to personal preference and, you know, how much detail you want to get. Like if you're using a lot of teeny tiny brushes, they can kind of get worn down on a rougher paper. So in that respect, I think a hot press paper would be good. And the sketchbook that I use has more of like a hot press paper in it, and I do enjoy that for my, you know, Sunday sketches. I think you know, I wouldn't buy a whole ream of it. I would maybe buy a small pad or a sheet of it and test it out and see if it works with your technique, because I think eventually you settle down and primarily use one or two papers that really works with the way that you like to work. But hot press it's smooth so that you can get a lot of detail and not have to worry about the hills and valleys of the paper. Now I did like how I got some water splashed there, so I'm just going to splash some on, so when I do go to paint this I will get some interesting effects. You don't have to do this though. If you don't like spatters, then by all means don't do it. Alright, I'm going to start with Quin Gold. And I just love, that's one thing I like about the core paints, is that they just kind of burst like off the brush onto the paper. It's fun to see that happen. There are cheaper paints that will do that too. Like the Prima paints do that quite a bit as well. And I'm going to grab some sap green. I'm mixing it in with some of the gold. Quin gold is a very intense yellow, very transparent, where most of your yellows tend to be a little opaque. Quin gold is very transparent because it's a quinacridone based color. Oh, I was getting an interesting texture there on the paper. I wonder if I had lotion on my hands or something when I transferred it.
Laura Jacques, what pencil did you use to do the initial sketch? I find my graphite always smudges if I do it under watercolor.
I just used a Bic mechanical pencil. And they can smudge, I will warn you. You might want like there's a pencil and many different companies make them, but look for the letter F, and that is a hard pencil that will keep a fine point. Drafters use that, like architects use that a lot, and that might give you a less, it'll definitely be less smudgy, because all the like mechanical pencils you get at the office supply store would generally be a number 2 or an HB, which is a little bit on the soft side. And I think I will do some smudgy, some spatters, because I didn't get as much dripping into the background as I thought I would. And that's personal preference, you don't have to do that. While this is still wet, I'm going to go in with some sap green. I'm just picking it up from the pan here, just getting that little gob of green on there, trying not to get too much water. I'm going to go around these kind of like pentagon shapes of those, I don't know what you call them, scales maybe on the pineapple, the eyes or whatever they are. The things that are hard to remove when you try to cut the pineapple because they go deep.
Cracked Heart Studio, by adding glycerin to my water, will it keep the water on the paper from drying too fast?
It will hasten the drying. And it may reduce the surface tension of the water a little bit. All right, I'm just going to tip this a little bit. I think I need a little more color in there. It does look a little too light. And I think I'm going to start adding in another color that I plan on using, which is phthalo blue. I don't want too much because it's such a strong color, so I'm going to mix it down with some sap green. But I like to get my colors integrated as soon as I can, because it just helps everything kind of marry up a little bit better. And I recommend you either tape your paper down, or you can use it loose like this, but you want to be able to pick it up and move it, either to make it more comfortable when you're painting, or so that you can get some of these playful effects by letting your paint run. I've obviously been in a tropical mood lately. We've done a flamingo, we've done a beach hut.
Well, we're in that weird kind of gray, dirty snows period.
Yeah.
Nothing's blooming yet.
Yeah, I've started walking outside though. I haven't been on the treadmill in a week. I've been outside. It's amazing how just like a few degrees warmer can make it feel so much more optimistic out
yes, we were my sister-in-law and mother-in-law and I were out on our back deck the other day when it was so nice, just sitting in the sun for a little bit, just soaking it up. It was lovely.
If you have any puddles, I recommend you dry your brush, lay it down in the puddle, and sop up the extra liquid, because if it dries, because you'll get cauliflowers, and that it might look cool if that happens down here, but if it happens up in the crown of the pineapple, it's not going to look as cool, because we want kind of smooth textures up there. And by doing this as opposed to just dabbing a paper towel, you're not as likely to leave like a puffy clouds behind. I'll be drying my paper in a minute, so if you have any questions, you can get them ready. I think while this is still damp, I do want to take a little bit of magenta, mix it with a little bit of Quin gold, And it's going to give me kind of like a peachy brownish color, and I want to go in and get some of that in the center of these scales where it kind of looks like a star. I just want to tone that a little bit. It's not super bright. The more you can do in this initial wash, the more you can get done here, the more time you're going to save, and often the more natural of a look you're going to get. I can tell that a painting is done when I'm starting to feel like this is getting fussy. And I think I might blot right in here a little bit because I know I'm going to want that a little bit lighter. All right, and because I brought magenta in, I think I would like to actually add a little bit of splashing of that, but I want to water it down quite a bit because that's really strong. Just a little in the background. And maybe just a little dot in the center of those pineapples just to give it a little pop. Oh, already, if I just stopped right now, I would like this painting 10 times more than this one right here. I just stop now. I'm like, yeah, I'm done.
Okay, video. Great seeing everybody today. Enjoy your Friday. There might be riots.
Happy Easter, everyone. There's nothing I can do to improve upon this.
It's perfect.
Man, oh, go ahead.
ID out of the blue. I find that even when I use 140-pound paper, it buckles. I purchased a Canson Montville 140-pound sketchbook and it warped and buckled. Is the only solution to stretch the paper, or is it user error?
Well, if you don't clip it down or anything, it will buckle a little bit. Something you can do to help, because I actually have that sketchbook and I do use it. Take a couple big bulldog or binder clips and just clip when you open your sketchbook to work, clip the side that you're working on down to its backing. You could even, if it's a spiral bound, you could even fold the whole thing over and clip it to itself all the way around, and that will help enormously. You can also tape down the edges, and that will help a little bit, but honestly, a sketchbook's a sketchbook. It's meant to record your thoughts quickly and conveniently, and if you have to stretch out paper, it's not convenient. I just get a few clips. The more clips you add, the better it's going to do, and just clip it down and just keep those clips right on your sketchbook so you always have them there and you don't have to hunt for them. But that's what I do, and it buckles a little bit, but it usually flattens back out once it's dry. As long as you don't leave it outside in the rain like I did with mine, you should be all set.
Studio LM20. Do you like the Canson XL mixed media paper, or do you prefer the Strathmore?
I'm trying to... Oh, you know what? I actually like the Canson, even though the Canson's thinner than the Strathmore mixed media paper. I feel like the surface of it does really well on the techniques that I like to do, like watercolor. I do a lot of watercolor techniques in my mixed media sketchbook, and the Canson XL just really handles water-based markers and watercolor really well, and also like not alcohol inks, I mean India inks. It's a good idea to dry the back too. So I prefer that, but if I need something that's more stable and sturdy, then I will use the Strathmore mixed media, because that's more of like a cardstock weight. So it just depends on what I'm doing. And I love the Strathmore mixed media tone tan and tone gray pads. Those are nice and thick and heavy, and you can do gouache on them, and they're great. So it's totally, I think quality wise very similar, but personally I like the Canson XL for the white anyway. All right, now what we're going to do is a little bit of shading, and what I want you to do is find a flat brush. It doesn't really matter what you're using. This is a 3/4 inch flat Mimic Kolinsky, so it's a synthetic that's meant to behave like a Kolinsky, which is firmer than a squirrel. A golden Taklon brush is fine for this, and what we're going to do is a technique called side loading. And so what I want you to do is wet your brush. And actually, we got to mix up our color first. We're going to be mixing actually pretty much everything here. But start off with your green, your sap green. I've just got a puddle here because I was doing it earlier. Then you're going to add some phthalo blue. That's going to really darken it and cool it down. But you can see how that blue kind of overtakes everything, so I'm going to go in with some more green. Now this color is pretty vibrant and we want to kill the vibrancy a little bit. We want to desaturate it. So we're going to add some magenta. And that made it a little purple. So we're going to add some gold, some quin gold. Oh, almost used up this pan. It's very exciting. There we go. So we have almost like a midnight green color here. And this is going to be side loaded into our shadow areas. Now I went top down when I did my practice piece, but I think I'm going to go bottom up this time because I want darker into the crown of the pineapple. If you look right here, the shadows are more tightly packed and they're deeper and darker, but they're not as faded out, and they get more faded out as you go up. So we're going to do a combination of a big brush when we're getting into the bigger petals, and we're going to do a smaller brush as we're in these smaller areas here. And that way I think we'll keep our work a little bit more consistent. So I'm just using a number 8 round, and I'm keeping this brush handy. It's damp and it's clean, it's in my hand, and that way if I do need to soften something up, I can do it. So I'm just going to look in here and put this anywhere I feel like I need a little bit of shadow. And a lot of these spaces here between the leaves are all filled in with that dark color. So that's why it'd be really difficult to get in around with the flat brush. Now, I get asked a lot about printing reference photos, especially in my classes, which are, there's a coupon code for 50% off through tomorrow in the video description if anybody wants to check them out. Shameless plug there. And I honestly usually don't print mine out. I will print them out for the live stream because I need my computer to run the live stream, so I can't be looking at, like, I can't have it up on the screen without losing too much space. But I just look at them on the screen. I find that I get a better representation of the photo on my screen than I do when I print it out. So don't feel bad if you don't have a printer. You definitely can do just as well bringing it up on your screen. So what I'm doing here, I'm just getting that corner of the brush in the paint and I am feathering it out. I'm just kind of working right over that area and softening it. And look at those 3 petals, how they're so nice and blended now versus like that, which is a hard edge. So this is similar to it's similar to the British 2-brush technique, except they typically don't do that with a flat brush. And the side loading I'm going to show you is typically not a technique that watercolorists use, but it's something I learned taking decorative painting classes back when I was a teenager, and I just thought it was such a handy technique that I've always used it. Even though acrylics never ended up being my thing, I found it to be so useful in watercolor. So it's never a waste to learn a different medium, even if it's something you don't typically plan on doing or do normally. It's not going to hurt you. It's easy to get lost with all of these petals too, all these leaves. I have a scrap of paper off screen that I tap my brush down on just to make sure I know what side of the brush I have the paint on. Because I'm not rinsing it, I'm just trying to keep the same side with the concentrated color on it. I'm testing it again just to make sure. And it doesn't have to be watercolor paper, it could be a piece of typing paper. Now I'm thinking if I flip it around I can just get a little bit of shadow under there, which will be just enough. There we go. You got any Easter plans, Sarah?
No.
No?
Nope.
Wow.
Which is fine with me. Can laze around the house in
There
my
you go.
PJs.
There you go. This might be the first year that the Easter Bunny has not brought eggs to hunt.
Well, you know, I think there's more kids that are younger that...
Yeah, I think so. I think the Easter Bunny needs to visit the younger kids.
Yeah, the kids here are a little too old for Easter Bunny.
The kids here are a little too competitive with who finds the most eggs.
Oh, gotcha. So then it's not even fun.
Yeah. Every year it's like, I've been meaning to tell that Easter Bunny that...
Don't stop by this year.
Of course, the girls are offended because, well, Jackson got to have Easter last year, and he was,
Oh, God.
he was 14.
See? That's the competition. Keeping track of everything.
Yeah.
It's all right. Just tell them the Easter Bunny's coming to my house this year instead of them.
Oh, they'll be knocking on your door then.
I don't have anything, though. That'll be the fool on them.
April Fools.
April Fools
That's
and
true.
Happy Easter. There's no candy here. Helen Lewis, what are your thoughts on Kimberly watercolor pencils?
Gee, you know, I don't think I've used the watercolor pencils, but the company that makes them does a pastel pencil that's really good and really cheap. So if that's any indication, you know, they're probably decent. I know they're made by the General's company, and they do wonderful stuff for cheap. So they're probably decent. I know they've been selling them forever. If your blending brush gets covered all the way across, you'll want to rinse it and blot it and start again. It's not like there's a ton of paint in there you're wasting or anything, so that looks a little puddly, so I just want to soften that. So don't worry about, you're not really wasting any. It's just you want to make sure that brush is not going to put color where you don't want it. And now I'm just going to hunt for any little ones that I feel like that I can't get in with the big brush, and add my shadows, and then I'll be able to carry on with just the big brush.
Carrie King, I was painting the other day and it turned out too dark. If I want the color more light, what could I do to make it that way?
You can add water. Add more water in your mix, or you can blot it after you put it down if you see on your paper that it's just way darker than what you want. If you've got the whole thing way too dark, or you've got one element too dark, like here on this pineapple, I had the pineapple and it looked alright, then I put a background in, then I realized, oh no, now my pineapple's too dark, I need the pineapple to be brighter than the background. So what I ended up doing was taking colored pencils and pastels and going over it to brighten this up so that it wouldn't have to compete with the background so much. So that's a great time to grab those mixed media supplies and layer on top, especially if you ever feel like you're a little hopeless because you've messed up. That's a great time to do the mixed media, because those like colored pencils and pastels are more opaque and they will stand up on top of the watercolor. So what I'm going to do now, I've wet my brush, it's clean, blotting it on one side, making sure the ferrule's dry. So the brush is damp. You can see it's kind of shiny there. And then what I'm going to do is lay this in the puddle of paint so that I am just getting this whole edge with that dark color. Don't try to actually lay the metal part down on the palette, and because you don't want to just put the bristles down and squish it, because if you get you could end up still getting paint across the whole thing. You just want paint on that edge. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use a whole side of your brush, and you are going to side load. It's very important that your layer underneath is dry. And that gives you just an effortless, really easy shadow. Sometimes you can do a couple leaves at once, and other times you need to reload. if you find you're getting a hard edge there, now keep in mind you're going to be wetting the paper, so it might look darker and it's really not, but if you're afraid that you might have a hard edge there, you can just go over it with a damp brush. Make sure your brush is drier than the brush that you use to side load, otherwise you can end up with backwashing. But I think that the edge I was seeing was just because I wet the paper underneath and you're just seeing wet paint versus dry paint, or you were seeing a layer of water over the dried paint underneath. But when in doubt, clean your brush and reload it. So I am going to move my paper as I go so it's comfortable, and I'm going to go over here. Your darkest shadow should be the deepest part of the leaf.
Lillian S., what are Mayan pigments and why do they not have pigment numbers?
I do not know. I think that's very strange. And I think some companies do put pigment numbers on their Mayan paints. I believe Daniel Smith has pigment numbers on their Mayan paints. I don't know why the Turner ones don't. And I don't really understand the Mayan paints, because I had the 18 set of Turners that had the Mayan red, yellow, and blue. And I found them to be very odd. Like, they were kind of transparent. Well, obviously the watercolors, so they'd be transparent, but they were almost gelatinous. It was very bizarre colors. I'm sure they have some sort of logical use, but I don't know what they are, honestly. If anybody wants to chime in on Mayan colors, that would be great.
We have lots of people here. We have 281 people watching right now.
Oh, nice.
Joe Maskey says they're newly formed pigment by scientists at University of Texas. Daniel Smith has licensed them. That's from the Spin Doctor.
Oh, is Rich here?
No, Joe answered. I'm assuming Joe and Spin and Rich have talked.
Oh, probably. Now this leaf here is a little tight to be getting in with that big brush. And I have an edge up there that I need to correct, because I can see that I twisted my brush, and so I ended up carrying the pigment where I didn't want it. And since it has phthalo in it, if I'm not careful, if I don't get in there, then it's going to stain. And I'm noticing I didn't do a very good job at coloring this leaf, so I'm actually going to grab some of my sap green and quin yellow and just kind of add that in right now.
Carrie King, what's the best way to make a background?
There's no real best way. It's however you like to do it. I tend to go wet and wet. Like, I wet the entire background, and then I, paint and splatter and drip in colors and kind of let them mix and mingle on their own. But I wouldn't say there's a best or worst way. It just depends on what you're going for. If you're going for a super smooth background, you might want to do a controlled wash, and that's where you mix a huge puddle of paint on your palette. You make sure you get enough to do the entire background, and then you use a round brush and you kind of go back and forth on dry paper, tipping your paper as you go until the entire background is covered. That's if you want like a really solid, unvaried background. There's lots of different ways. Wet and wet is, I think, the easiest and usually gives you a reliable result. And I have all those backgrounds in my essentials course too, if anybody needs a little bit more help on those. I go over all those washes. Okay, so I'm going to, I think I'll skip that leaf for right now, and I'm going to do these three. I've mixed up a fresh puddle, and again, I am just going to lay the side of my brush into the paint, and we're going to go and get our shadows done here.
Joe Macy said that Rich talks about in those paints in his Daniel Smith swatch videos.
Okay, guys. So if you guys want to learn more, if you go to this youtube.com, look up the Spin Doctor, spin-doctor, and you'll find him. I'm subscribed to him. If you go to my channel page, I think you can see my subscriptions. I think I've recommended him on the side of my page. If not, I'll go and do that so you can find him. But he's a wealth of information of all things sciencey, pigmenty. It'll make your head spin.
Yes, he's one of those guys, like, you think you know, and then you watch a video, like, I didn't know anything.
Yep. But I also like that he doesn't get, like, too, like, on a soapbox about,
right.
Well, you've got to have this and that, or don't bother painting. Because some people are just like, well, if that's not, a top of the line, light, fast color, I'm not going to bother. Because, my work needs to last a million years, He's much more approachable and realistic, I think. Okay, now I'm gonna go. If you have a really tapering one like this, you might have to start from the top and work down and kind of twist your brush as you go. And that's going to make the pigment go all the way across your brush. You will need to clean, blot, and reload after that. And I'm going to see if I can get around this one now. So you just need to know the brush that you need for this certain technique. So I wouldn't want to use a faux squirrel for side loading technique because it holds way more water than what I'd want, and I'd end up just getting juicy puddles and it would be difficult to control. Whereas a brush like this is a little bit more firmness. It's not going to hold quite as much water, so I'm going to have more control. You could also use a regular golden Taklon synthetic, the very inexpensive kinds. This is a good one too, like an angled, because you could always remember you're putting your color on the angle, and it's really easy to maneuver. This is an Aqualon by Roland Langnickel. That's another favorite line, and they're not very expensive. So those are some good things to try. Now I really like how the crown has a lot more dimension just by doing those thin side-loaded shadowing techniques. I think that's a great use for that. So over here we've got our kind of lighter yellower. It's kind of like the beginnings of the little crown leaves, and we're going to mix up some gold and sap green, mostly gold though. I just identify a clean well, got a little sap. And we can go and layer on some color on some of these. That's I got too much on my brush. So this paper is not very absorbent, so you will notice when you paint on this, if you do choose to try it, now you don't need this, you can use anything you have, you'll notice that it's not going to absorb as much paint. It doesn't resist it, but it pretty much stays on the surface. It has enough cotton in there that you can glaze. Like we did all that glazing, and I didn't have to worry about pulling up any paint underneath, but it's not going to take, tons and tons of water like you typically need if you're doing, if you're using arches or another 100% cotton thicker paper. So the thinner the paper, the less water it's going to take. Now I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to grab some of the gold on its own.
Amanda Hatfield, have you used the Kuretake Japanese watercolors, and do you like them or not?
I've used the ones that come in the really big pans, the Gansai Tambi, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Yeah, I like them all right. They're not my favorite. They're a little more opaque, it seems. And they have if you use them, if you happen to have like a passage that's kind of thick, you do get this kind of weird sheen on it because of the type of paint that it is. I know a lot of card makers like it because they work well on like unsized paper. So if you're using cardstock or maybe using a student grade paper that doesn't have as much sizing as as like an arches or another artist grade paper, they can be helpful because um, they don't tend to pill as much because they lay down they almost have like their own sizing in it because they're more designed for like sumi-e and rice paper painting, so they're painting on a super porous surface, so they're designed for that, so they work better with a less expensive paper. What I'm doing here is I am putting in some of this Quin Gold, and then I am blending it out. So I'll put down under the top of these and sides of these star shapes that are on the scales, and then I will wipe my brush off and then just kind of spread it. So you can do quite a few at once because it sits on top of the paper pretty well here. I'm gonna sneeze.
Bless you. Bless you.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever had a sneeze during a live stream before. That's a new one. I know this looks really bright. It looks really bright on my monitor. The yellow is bright, but I don't think it's probably as bright as you're seeing. I will upload a finished picture on my blog after the live stream, so you can have a better look at it if you want to. All right, the next thing I'm going to do, because we have our lights down, is I want to get the darks in, and I'm going to do the dark shapes around the scales here. And we are going to do sap green and phthalo blue for that. We might need a little magenta, but we'll see how it looks when we get those two colors together. Phthalo is very, very strong. Use the rest of this green maybe. And I want it pretty thick. Okay. Now when I apply this, I want to get as much done while I'm doing it, so I don't want to have to go in and fiddle with this too much. So I am actually dabbing in the paint with kind of short little strokes, and I'm looking back and forth to my reference photo as I go to make sure that I'm not getting lost here, because we get a lot of different shapes kind of tessellating together here. So I'm just kind of dabbing it in there. And there's not like even amounts of shadow. It's kind of like a quilt with all these little shapes coming together. I'm going to grab a smaller brush. I'll just grab my liner. I can use both of these brushes together. And sometimes you'll see like that star shape kind of stretch over. And I kind of want to get that sketched in, because this kind of stretches over sometimes into like the next neighboring shape. Whoops, okay, I didn't mean to do that. Good thing I put spatters in the background, so that won't be too out of place. Try not to be good enough. I'm just going to leave that big one there because it looks like I meant to. We'll have to spatter on some of that color as well.
That's fine.
I better put one of these brushes down. 3 brushes in the hand. I'm barely handling 2. We don't need 3. Any questions? Well, while I'm dabbing away here.
We're caught up for the moment. We've got a lot of chat going on, which is good.
Oh, good. I like to get these dark values in as soon as I can, even though they look really kind of garish at this point because we have the lights and then we have the super dark. But I feel like once I have that dark framework in, it's a lot easier for me to get my midtones and make sure everything is in relation to one another. Like if I get my lightest values and my darkest values in right off the bat, it keeps me from making mistakes, or it keeps me from having the whole thing like way too light and having to go in and adjust everything. It just eliminates a lot of that in a lot of that future work. And because I have phthalo in this mix, I know it's going to stain my paper pretty well, so I will be able to glaze over this as needed. Parts that I'm painting green are parts that would be indented. Mix up some more of this. Actually, I think I'll throw some blue right into this pan. I'll go in just to save a little time. Go in and put all my darkest areas in with the bigger brush. This is a number 4 round. It's not a super pointy brush. It's one of the Mimic Squirrels. And then I'll go in and put my little line work in with the with the liner.
Excuse me. It's good water.
I did find some really nice affordable brushes in town, and I've had a hard time finding the Maxine's mop for people. It seems like they're not making the 1/4 inch one anymore, but I found these brushes here. These are the Menta Menta by Royal and Langnickel. I haven't seen them online anywhere yet, but they do have little scrubbers that are filberts that are really nice. They're all these Menta brushes are vegan, so there's no animal fur, and these I think would be just as good as the Maxine's mop, and you can get a 1/4 inch. So if you're having a hard time, these Menta brushes are excellent, and they just came out. I'd never seen them before, never heard of them before I saw them in AC Moore last weekend, and they're very inexpensive. I think regular price they're like $5 a brush. All sizes are priced the same. So if you're having a hard time finding a Maxine's mop, I would recommend that. And their other brushes are good too. I got a couple rounds to try them out, and they're really nice. And then just kind of go in and throw in some line work. Pull some little wrinkles out from those darker shapes you put in there. We're going to be glazing over this, so don't worry if it's if it's standing out too much, if it's too contrasty, because it's not going to stay that way. But we got to get this down and dried before we can go over it. And those little wrinkles will go towards the center, so you want to drag those wrinkles in towards the star. If you're unsure of a detail, then leave it out. And just try to balance it around. You know, you don't have to do a ton of detail, but just try to make sure you've got about the same amount of detail throughout the picture. This is something you could spend a lot of time working on. Now I'm going to go up here into this gold area and kind of break apart some of those little yellow spikes using some of this green. Give us a little texture and a little definition here and there. But again, if you're confused about what a detail is, like if you can't really see, if you don't understand where that little leaf is coming from, and you can't really make heads or tails of it, when in doubt, leave it out, I say, with details, because you can end up getting yourself into more trouble. You can, if you're sure something's there, you can suggest it, but if you're not sure, you're better off just to leave it. Let the brain fill in the blanks. All right, so that's going to need to dry. And I think I'm going to speed it along with my heat tool. So if anybody has any questions while I am heating this up, fire away.
The Draw Gal 101, how do you stop making your brush's hair fall out, or would you have to buy a new brush set? And if so, what do you recommend?
If you've got brushes where the hairs are falling out, generally that brush was never, the hairs weren't glued in very well, and the ferrule wasn't crimped very well. So what I would do is actually, if you can, visit a art supply store and pick up the brushes that you're intending on purchasing, buy them individually, and actually feel the bristles and give them a little tug. If you know you see hairs start to come out, don't buy that brush. It could just be they didn't crimp it properly or glue it properly in the factory. If it's a brand you've heard of, or you've heard me recommend, or you know somebody else has used it, you can usually be safe to order online. It can be cheaper, but you know, you don't need that many brushes for watercolor. So if you just go to the store, I mean, they'll usually have a glue in them. Sometimes they'll let you wash the glue out to see, but if you give them a little pull like that, you shouldn't get any bristles in your hands. If you do, then pick another brush. So generally, if the hair's falling out, it's going to keep falling out. There's an issue with the brush. And honestly, I like anything by Creative Mark. I like anything by Royal and Langnickel. I find those brushes are very inexpensive and high quality, so that'd probably be what I recommend. If you can't get that where you live, I think probably like Princeton Neptune is a good line, and I think they're worldwide. Okay, so I think I'm going to give this a try here. I am going to use my angle brush, and I am going to make a brighter green, because I want something that's really going to be almost like a emerald, like jewelry green here. So what I'm going to do is mix the phthalo blue and my gold, because I'm going to get a brighter green than if I just use sap green, because sap green's a little more earthy and a little warmer. I always mix my yellow first, because that's the weaker of the colors. And you just need a little touch of the blue. This is also going to be a very transparent color because the using two very transparent colors, because your yellow is very transparent and your blue is there. That looks pretty good. Now I do need to wash my brush because I'm going to do that side loading technique again. So we clean it and we blot it, and it's easy to remember because we're using the angle. And I am going to just put the edge, the pointy edge, into my paint. And this is actually pretty easy. We're going to do kind of corner to corner. Oh, my brush, I need to reload that because I got that creeped. My brush was too wet, so the paint creeped all the way across. So I'll just blot off in the center there. All right, so I need this brush a little bit drier. You still want it to be shiny and the bristles to be stuck together.
Pokey, what is a good sub for Quinn Gold?
You could use gamboge. So I'm just getting that kind of blush. And you can always practice this on a scrap of paper, like newsprint, or, well, probably not newsprint, but like notebook paper, typing paper. So since this is a traditional synthetic, it's not as absorbent, so I do need to reload more often, like after every other stroke or so. But I'm doing that same technique we did on the leaves. And that's giving us a much nicer, more natural look because we're glazing over those really dark shadows and giving it we're kind of bridging the gap, bringing that mid-tone in there. We had our lights, we had our darks, and we need our mids. And it's softening what we have underneath. So if you're doing this with student quality paints, and you're noticing that when you go over it, this is a pretty gentle technique, so it really shouldn't bother your student grade paints, but in case it does, or maybe your brushes are a little bit stiffer and you're seeing that you're lifting up the paint underneath. Maybe your paper has more sizing than this one does, and you're lifting up what's underneath. You can do the midtones first and then go over and do those shadows last, or do them with like a pen. You could either do like a dip pen, or you could do even like an India ink. You could do any sort of ink that you want, but that will help if you're using a student quality supply. If you find that it's just not, you can't layer because it just mixes in with everything underneath or lifts it up, or you can go over it and do a colored pencil on the top later. I'm going to mix up some more of that. Again, we used our Quinn Gold, which is that's a pretty warm yellow, but it's very transparent. Generally, your warmer colors are more opaque, so it's such a quirky color. I caught my cat drinking out of my water container this morning, and I see a cat hair in my palette. It's a bad cat. She'll be glowing one of these days.
She'll just come out and be a rainbow.
Yeah. Another reason to use student quality supplies that don't contain toxic pigments. Yeah, we're just doing the same thing. We're going around and side loading in their mid values. And you can always go on top of them again if you feel, excuse me, that they're not dark enough. You can always let it dry, layer on more. Now when your bristles get to this point, when they're spreading apart like that, hopefully you can see that, you just need to reload it because you've used up all the carrier water that was on your brush. So rinse it, blot it, and reload. Just remember, when you are side loading, you're using the whole width of the brush, because it's applying paint and blending in one motion. You need enough water on there so it will blend, but you don't want so much water that it just carries your paint all the way across on your brush. Now up here, I'm just gonna go around some of these little spikes. Alright, you can go in and add more layers if you want to, or add more color. I'm going to tip this away from the light just so you can maybe see it a little bit better. You probably need a little bit more color, but for now I'm going to take that angled brush and I'm going to do another layer of shadowing up here on the leaves again, because I feel like that needs to be a little darker. So I'm going to mix up some more of my darker color. We're going to use the phthalo blue. We're going to use magenta. That's going to give us a nice purple. And we're going to add in some sap green. And if need be, we'll put some yellow in there. Well, I might not need it. Scrape off as much of that paint as you can before washing your brush. And we are going to do some more shading. And I think I will start off with a smaller brush to get into the details where it's really dark, like we did before, and work our way up. I probably won't blend so much with this. I'll just keep my brush not super wet and just kind of feather it out as I go. And this would be more of our more distinct shadows. This gives it a little bit more drama. Oh, Sarah, I had somebody leave a comment the other day. They'd like to see your artwork.
I don't have any artwork.
Oh, I do recall some glass bottles.
Oh, that's gone.
What happened to it?
I think it ended up in the recycling bin. I don't have any artwork because I don't do art.
You should bring some jewelry.
That's not art.
Yeah, it is.
And yours is watercolor for the most part, so.
Yeah, people like to do all sorts of stuff.
Nobody wants to see it.
Let us know in the chat, guys.
Everybody else has way better stuff to show than I would ever have.
I'm going to load up again, get the dark blue on the side of my brush, and we're going to go through and shade, or it's our mix, it's kind of that teal color that we just made, same color we were using. Now remember, it does dry lighter. And we're just basically going over what we did before, but since we're using a smaller brush, it's not going to carry the blend out as far. So it's going to be those more deeper, intense shadows. If you're, I like this like very scant blend, but if you want it to blend more, you just need a wetter brush. I wouldn't go with more paint, I would go with wetter brush.
Shauna Musin, I bought and love the Mission Gold Pure Pigment set because of the vibrancy and creamy texture. I tried Daniel Smith, but I'm wondering if I might prefer M. Graham because it's made with honey.
I like M. Graham. The thing you'll notice, with M. Graham, the big difference you're gonna see between that and the Mission Gold, I find like the M. Graham has a little bit more texture to it. And you'll see that with Daniel Smith as well, but every color in M. Graham seems to have its own personality, whereas like I feel like Mission Gold, they're kind of like Core, where they're very, very vibrant, and they have like a smoother, I guess that would be like a smoother consistency. And M. Graham, you got some colors are going to granulate heavily, and you have some colors that are going to be smooth and, you know, not granulate and kind of stain. So I just feel like there's a lot more personality between the colors in M. Graham. But I really don't think, I think both M. Graham and Daniel Smith are good. I think Daniel Smith is quite a bit more expensive. M. Graham was the first like professional watercolors I got, and it was because they were fairly new when I was ready to upgrade, and the guy at the art supply store gave me a really awesome deal. So they've always like held a very special place in my heart. But you know, either of them are good. The thing to also warn you about with M. Graham, though, if you live in a climate that's really humid and you want to take your paints with you, like you want to travel with them, the honey in them can be very sticky. The same with Sennelier. So if you're pouring a travel set of paints and you're going to go on vacation and you're someplace really humid, those paints may slide out of their palette and just be kind of sticky and messy. I don't really have a problem with that where I live, but when I went on vacation last winter and it was really humid where we went, very tropical, my Senneliers were very sticky. And they painted fine, but I never had an issue with them here, like on the coast of Maine, but in a tropical area, I definitely had they were sticky. They would get sand stuck to them, and I never had an issue with that. But I really don't think you go wrong with either brand. I think that added quite a bit of nice dimension. And you'll notice you don't get quite as much of a blend with a regular synthetic as you do a Mimic synthetic, because the Mimics just hold much more water and they stay wetter longer. You just get a much longer blend. But when you're doing something like the deeper shadows, you don't necessarily want a longer blend. So the bottom of the pineapple would be stiffer and harder, just because this is looser and floppier, but I still feel like this is a little too stiff. So I am going to mix up some green and just kind of be able to kind of splosh them down here and there. So I've got the dregs of my mixed green. I'm adding more gold to it, so it's a little bit brighter. And I'm just going to splash some into some of these areas where I feel like it should be a little bit brighter. I was going to use Naples yellow on this, but I ended up not, because I didn't have the problem with it being too dark. Like I started off with Naples yellow to see if I could keep it as watercolor and still bring up the brightness, but it just wasn't strong enough, so I ended up going with pastel and colored pencil. But since I don't have it too dark here, I don't think I'm going to use the Naples. And I'm contemplating using some colored pencils, maybe just to add that kind of waxy texture onto the crown here, and maybe some more detail onto the body of the pineapple. So if you want to see colored pencils, let me know in the chat. Sarah will let me know, and
I'm pretty sure people are going to say yes. I don't.
I'm going to wrap up pretty soon here. I'm be seeing pineapples in my sleep.
Mary shows, I have accidentally left my paints open for too long and got a layer of dust on them. Wiping across with a wet brush just seems to stick it down more. Any suggestions?
Honestly, I would just they'll clean themselves as you work with them. I really wouldn't worry about it. I'm gonna scrape in some of those little lines like we painted in with the darker green, just to give them a little bit more interest and texture. Because then it gives us just slightly darker lines. And they're very fine. They just add a little bit of, it's really hard to go wrong with them when you do that. Okay, so I will go ahead and do some colored pencil. It's so very tempting to want to do something to the background, but I know from my previous error not to mess with that. I'm going to turn it right upside down though, so I can not drag my hand through that wet and not have to take time to dry it. And I'm just using a white Prismacolor. Even if you don't like Prismacolor pencils because of the them being very delicate, it's hard. You're going to be hard pressed to find a nicer white pencil. So if nothing else, I think a white Prismacolor pencil deserves spot in anyone's craft room, art room. I don't want to cover over everything because I really like how some of these underwash mixes look. Like I like how those colors came together there. I just want to give it a little bit of a waxy, that waxy film that they have. And you can also get the edges and it will help give it a little bit of a lift and highlight against the shadows that you had previously sketched. You can also lay down regular colored pencils, wax-based colored pencils, any brand, and then you can watercolor over them and kind of unify everything again. So if you do end up putting down too much and you decide you wish you could change it, you can, or if it looks too stark, you can unify over. I have a dark green here and I'm just kind of tidying up a little bit, adding little bits of shadow where I feel like it might need it. This paper doesn't have much of a tooth. It's quite smooth. So I can just go really light on this and it's not going to be dragging or skipping over the tooth of my paper.
Gail AC is wondering, are these watercolor pencils or just the regular colored pencils?
Just regular colored pencils. You could use watercolor pencils, but then if you go over it with watercolor, they will turn into paint. So if you did want a resist effect, then you'd want to use regular wax. I like the feeling of using the wax pencils because they glide a little bit better. If I'm doing a dry technique, if I know I'm gonna do a wet technique, obviously I like watercolor pencils because they dissolve in water. But any place you wanted a little bit more shadow, you can just do very gentle circles with a blunt pencil and you'll just get a soft rouge. It's just a little adjustment layer. Oh, I like the way that looks.
That white looks really nice on the edges there.
And I'm also taking some of this dark green and giving it a little more texture in these teeny tiny little leaves. It's kind of like these little spikes in the center of each of these scales almost like turn into these little leaves up here that then turn into the crown. So they all kind of unify, all the shapes unify in this. And you'll find that with most things in nature, that all shapes will unify, or there'll be some sort of shape that you can unify everything in a piece together with. I am going to dry this a little bit because I can feel it's still a little tacky. So if you do have any questions, then
now's the time.
Now's a great time.
Let me get caught up. Busy chat.
That's awesome. Everyone chatting about Easter? Or?
Easter, paints, brushes. I guess some people didn't realize that I put Chewy down. They were asking about Chewy, so I was catching up with a few people about that. Alright, we are actually all caught up on questions.
I try to use very limited supplies, very limited colors, especially when I'm going in here at this stage, because I don't want to make anything discordant, so I'm going to stick with this dark green. I am going to sharpen it really quick. And I have switched to using primarily an electric pencil sharpener. I found that I always used to think they would break my pencils, but I think they're actually gentler. And the pencil sharpener that I have, people have been asking me about it. Unfortunately, the model is discontinued, but it was very inexpensive, and I was able to get it at a place called Ocean State Job Lot, which is like a discount place. But anyways, I had it for about 10 years. And the brand name is Foray, which is the brand that Office Depot sells. So that might be a place to start. I also know that Jerry's has some pencil sharpeners, but I've never bought like an artist electric pencil sharpener before, so I don't have a recommendation. But if anyone does, knows has a currently available electric pencil sharpener, I'd love to know what you're using, because I get asked all the time for recommendations, and the one I use is no longer available.
I think I just have, not Swing Line, but Swinger, whatever.
I think it's Swing Line. They make staplers and stuff.
I think that's what I have. I think I got it at Target or Walmart for $10, and I've had it for a long time, and it works really well. I've had no problems with it.
Oh, nice. Now, does it plug into the wall, or do you have to use batteries?
It's a plug-in.
Oh, good. Because I like to have the ones that plug in too.
Because I find that with the battery ones, they kind of chew through batteries pretty quickly.
Yeah. So are you using it with your watercolor pencils and your color pencils?
No, the watercolor pencils, my actual pencils, I don't use it. I just use it for regular pencils.
Oh, yeah.
But for my watercolor stuff, I find it chews them up too much.
Oh, okay. Well, I've had really good luck with this one. It's a 3-hole one, so it's got your standard one, then one that's a little bit smaller, and one that's bigger. So I think because it doesn't wiggle, your pencils aren't going to wiggle in there. I think that's why, because it holds them still when they sharpen them.
Yes.
And just Prismacolors are so delicate that, I think they've fixed their quality control issues that they were having a few years ago, but they're still a very soft core pencil, and that's just one of the things you have to deal with a really soft core pencil.
Let's see, get back. We had a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah.
Ariel Nathanson, how do you decide what to paint? I try to paint once a day, but the hardest part is looking for inspiration.
Well, there's a website that I use called Unsplash, and what I really like about it is that there are collections. And so if, say, you have some time, maybe you're not going to paint right away, you're just you got some free time, you can browse it, and you can add photos to collections. So I have all these different collections. I might have a collection for oil painting, a collection for watercolor, and I just plop things into collections. And so then when it comes time to paint, if I don't have something I know I want to work on, then I'll just get my collections. Also on Paint My Photo, which is a free site where photographers share their photos with artists so they can paint them. There you can also do albums, and you can sort photos by albums. And I have an album for pastel and an album for oil painting, and it's a great way to kind of bookmark your pictures, because I found I had that same issue that you're having, is I'd have time to paint, but I had no idea what I was going to do. So that really helped solve that problem. Sorry about that. Obnoxious pencil sharpener. And I'm just gonna put some detail here on these little stars. I feel like that's what it really just needs now, is just a little bit of that brown detail. This is dark brown. I think that's even in like most of the inexpensive Prismacolor sets too. So you don't need a huge set.
Cyan Ink Art had a Derwent electrical pencil sharpener, and it broke after 6 months.
Oh, that's too bad.
BC Deeks has a Royal electric sharpener.
Oh.
Likes that one. Patricia Hink has an X-Acto plug-in and works really well.
Oh, that's good. Jason had an X-Acto one, and I did something to it with one of my pencils. It just stopped working.
Joe Maskey doesn't like the handheld sharpeners, but has an X-Acto School Pro.
Mm-hmm. I've always wondered about the ones that you crank, like the old school ones. I had one of those, but it was like a plastic body, and it just never held up very well. I felt like it was like chewing my pencils. But I love the idea of that, having a pencil that doesn't run, a sharpener that doesn't run on electricity, but is that type of pencil sharpener.
Gail Robertson has a bow stitch that she got at Staples that says it's colored pencil compatible.
Oh, good. Yeah, I remember Boss Stitch ones from grade school. The teachers always had that brand. Yeah, I think this little bit of brown on these like star shapes really makes them. And you can go in and add a little bit to these, the tips of these leaves, because they do get kind of like dried out and kind of crispy and dried out at the ends, and that will help make it look a little bit more realistic. Any of the curved over ends that you want to grab some yellow ochre too, I think would look nice. Doesn't need to be super sharp, but I did need it a little bit sharper than this. So if you do a little brown on the tips of any of those, having a little yellow ochre in there too will help bridge it. So usually if they're kind of dying, get a little brown and yellow on the ends. Just looks like that. Dried texture, and you can add some of that into these star areas too if you want to brighten it up. And I will be taking a little bit of magenta and adding that in the center of these too, because I think that's really makes our green sing when we have that opposite color in there. And you take more time than I'm doing. I just want to kind of give you an idea on finishing this up, but you can take as long as you want, because this is one of those ones you could fiddle with for quite a while. You can add as much or as little as you want. I'm going to grab a little magenta to finish it off. Oh, this is an old one. This is a barrel Prismacolor magenta. That's probably from my youth. A little bit of magenta in there where we had originally put the watercolor. This is a fun paper to work on. I haven't worked on this in a long time. Strathmore Aquarius, if you're looking for something new to try. And I didn't tape it down, and it's pretty thin, but it's really not buckling. All right, what do you think? Does that look done?
I think you're done.
All right.
You could mess with it for a long time.
And I may have to live stream. I might mess with it a little bit more, but I think that's good for today. Does anybody have any questions before we go?
I think we're all caught up.
All right, wonderful. Again, the supplies I used are available at jerry'sartarama.com. They also have this little set of pastels that I used on the practice one, but I didn't use on this. But I want to mention it because they're cheaper than Amazon at Jerry's. So if you were looking for that little set of half-stick Faber-Castell pencils, I think they're like $26 at Jerry's, and I think they were like $35 on Amazon. So if you were looking for them, that's a great buy. And also, tomorrow is the last day of my launch special coupon. The coupon code is Draw Me. It's in the video description. That's for my new drawing class or any of the other courses I have on my Teachable School. And that's it. You got anything to add?
Happy Easter!
Happy Easter, everyone. Thank you so much for painting with me today. And until next time, happy crafting.